The sun rose over whispering pines like it always did. Perfect, golden, and completely fake. Every lawn was exactly 2 inches tall. Every mailbox the same shade of heritage beige, and every driveway free of anything that might scream, actual human lives here. That was the Whispering Pines HOA promise, drilled into us by President Karen Matthews for the last 8 years. She called it elevating property values. The rest of us called it living in a step-4 dollhouse with fines. I'd been the enforcement coordinator for 12 years. Volunteer, of course, no salary. Just the satisfaction of making sure the rules that protected everyone's investment actually got followed. I knew every bylaw backward and forward because I'd written half of them after the last flood of lawsuits. Section 22C had been my quiet insurance policy, slipped in during a sleepy board meeting nobody bothered to read. Karen had smiled that plastic smile and said, "Margaret, you're such a detail person." She had no idea how right she was. My phone buzzed at 7:20 a.m. Sharp. Karen's name flashed like a warning light. I answered before the second ring. With that attitude, "Margaret, don't even bother showing up to the board meeting today. No hello. No good morning. Neighbor. Just ice." I could hear her breathing, that little huff she did when she thought she was being clever. Then, because she never learned to mute herself, she muttered to someone off mic, "You have to intimidate that stubborn old bat. She thinks she owns the place." I didn't flinch. I'd heard worse from people who actually paid me. "Okay," I said, voice steady as a freshly painted fence post. "Good luck with that." Click. I set the phone down, walked to my kitchen table, and opened the laptop. By 9 a.m., the resignation letter was drafted clean, professional, zero drama. I printed it, signed it, and had my attorney's courier deliver copies to Karen, the entire board, and the HOA's outside counsel by 10:30. Certified mail. Return receipt. The works. By 11:35, I was on a Zoom with the president of the neighboring Oak Ridge Residents Alliance, who'd been begging me to consult for them for months. "Margaret, we want you yesterday," he said. I smiled for the first time that morning. "I'm all yours." The neighborhood didn't know it yet, but the dominoes were already falling. Back at HOA headquarters, Karen's living room decorated in aggressive beige, Tyler, her 25-year-old son who'd just moved home after finding himself at some fancy business school, was already strutting around like he owned the cul-de-sac. "Mom, we need leaner operations," he announced, sipping an overpriced oat milk latte. "Margaret's legacy processes are clogging everything. Time to modernize." Karen nodded, pearls clicking. "Exactly, darling. She's emotionally attached to those old rules. We'll replace her with someone younger, fresher. Maybe that nice influencer girl on Maple Street who does those aesthetic reels." They laughed. They actually laughed. They had no clue that Section 22C existed. I'd written it 7 years ago after Karen tried to waive fines for her sister's illegal shed. The clause was simple, airtight, and vicious. Removal of the enforcement coordinator without a 30-day review period automatically triggered personal liability for every board member, suspended all enforcement powers until an external audit, and opened the door for every resident to claim damages for selective enforcement. Plus a lovely little sunset provision that froze HOA bank accounts until the mess was cleaned up. I'd buried it in Appendix D, page 47. Right after the paragraph about acceptable gnome quantities. Tyler's first official act as the new strategy advisor was to post on the neighborhood Facebook group, "Exciting changes coming. Streamlining for a brighter future." Glowing star translation. We're firing the woman who actually knows what she's doing. I watched the comments roll in from my new home office. "Mrs. Delgado from Pinecrest Lane. Finally. Maybe they'll stop harassing my tomatoes." "Mr. Patel, does this mean my boat can stay in the driveway more than 48 hours?" Karen replied with her signature heart emojis and a passive-aggressive, "We appreciate everyone's patience as we elevate standards together at heart." I sipped my coffee and waited. The first crack appeared by noon. Old Mr. Henderson on Elm Street had been parking his classic Mustang in the driveway for 3 days straight. A clear violation of the temporary vehicle storage rule I used to enforce with polite reminders. Without me, nobody knew whose job it was to send a notice. So the Mustang stayed. Then the Johnsons decided their Halloween decorations could stay up until Valentine's Day, because who's going to stop us now? Karen drove past, saw the plastic skeletons still waving, and nearly rear-ended her own mailbox. Her frantic group text to the board lit up my phone. Somehow, I was still on the thread because nobody had removed me yet. "We need to address these violations immediately. Margaret's absence is creating chaos." Tyler replied, "I got this. Mom, I'll handle enforcement myself." Famous last words. By 3 p.m., Tyler had sent his first official violation notice to Mrs. Delgado for excessive vegetable growth. The problem? He used the old template I'd written, but forgot to attach the appeal process. Mrs. Delgado called him directly, voice sweet as sugar. "Honey, did you know your mother's azaleas are 6 inches over the height limit? Should I send you a photo? Or should we just call it even?" Tyler hung up on her. Big mistake. Word spread faster than a bad HOA fine. By evening, half the neighborhood was testing limits. Flags that had been taken down per the no political expression after election season rule went back up. One guy painted his front door bright red, against the approved color palette. Another installed a 6-foot privacy fence because the new board clearly doesn't care. Karen's perfectly curated Instagram story of Harmony and Whispering Pines got flooded with comments. Harmony? My neighbor's yard looks like a jungle and nobody's doing anything. She deleted the story in 20 minutes. I sat on my porch that night, watching the sunset paint the cul-de-sac in soft pinks and golds, and allowed myself one quiet laugh. The woman they'd called Stubborn Old Bat had just pulled the pin on their entire operation, and they were still too arrogant to hear the grenade ticking. The next morning, Karen's voicemail was waiting. "Margaret, darling, we need to talk. This isn't how we do things in Whispering Pines. Call me." I didn't. Instead, I forwarded the resignation receipt to my attorney and opened the spreadsheet I'd kept for 12 years. Every violation Karen had ever ignored for her friends. Every fine she'd waived. Every backroom deal. All time-stamped. Already, Tyler tried to play hero at the emergency board meeting that afternoon. I heard about it from 3 different neighbors who just happened to walk their dogs past Karen's house with the windows open. He stood up in his polo shirt and declared, "We're moving to a leaner model. No more legacy babysitting. The community will self-regulate." Mr. Patel raised his hand politely. "Son, last time the community self-regulated, somebody's goat got loose and ate Mrs. Henderson's prize roses. Margaret handled that in 48 hours. You planning to chase livestock in your Tesla?" The room went quiet. Karen tried to laugh it off. Tyler's vision is modern. That's all. But modern wasn't working. By day 3, the violation inbox, still routed to my old address because nobody knew how to change it, had 187 unread messages. People weren't reporting each other. They were reporting the board for inaction. One resident attached a photo of Karen's own garage door left open for 4 days with Christmas lights still dangling. Selective enforcement much? I forwarded that one to the external auditor listed in Section 22C. Just a friendly heads up. The first real explosion came on day 5 when the bank called Karen. Section 22C had triggered automatically the moment my certified resignation hit their records. All enforcement powers were suspended. HOA dues collected for the month were frozen. And every board member now carried personal liability for any lawsuit filed by residents over the next 90 days. Karen's scream was so loud my neighbor across the street heard it. Tyler tried to fix it the only way he knew how, by bullying. He showed up at my door at 7 p.m. Hair perfectly gelled, clipboard in hand. Mrs. Ellis, we can still work something out. Mom says if you just come back part-time, no hard feelings. I offered him a glass of lemonade. Tyler, sweetheart, did your mother ever read the bylaws she makes everyone else follow? Section 22C is pretty clear. You don't get to intimidate the stubborn old bat after you've already pulled the trigger. He blinked. What's Section 22C? I smiled the same smile I'd given his mother on the phone. Good luck finding out. He left without the lemonade. Inside, the board was panicking. Karen called an emergency town hall for the whole neighborhood. Mandatory attendance. She claimed, even though she had zero power to enforce it anymore. Half the street showed up just to watch the show. She stood at the front of the community center in her best power blazer, pearls gleaming, trying to project calm. Friends, there seems to be a misunderstanding about recent changes. We're simply streamlining. Mrs. Delgado cut her off. Streamlining? My tomatoes are thriving and nobody's finding me. This is the best week I've had in years. Laughter rippled. Karen's face went the color of her forbidden red door. Tyler jumped in. We're working on a new app for violations. Modern technology. Mr. Henderson raised his hand. Does the app know your mother's azaleas are illegal? Because I've got pictures. The room erupted. Phones came out. Photos of Karen's own violations flooded the group chat in real time. Someone projected them on the screen behind her. Boom. Azaleas. Boom. Christmas lights in February. Boom. Her sister's illegal shed that had somehow never received a notice. Karen's voice cracked. This is harassment. No. Karen, I said from the back row, standing up for the first time. I hadn't planned to speak, but the moment felt right. This is what happens when you remove the one person who actually read the rules. Section 22C wasn't a suggestion. It was the safety net you all signed off on 7 years ago. The room went dead silent. Even the crickets outside seemed to pause. Tyler's clipboard clattered to the floor. You wrote that. Every word, I said. And now the auditor is on his way. Personal liability. Frozen accounts. Full review of every wave fine in the last decade. Should make for interesting reading. Karen's perfectly lipsticked mouth opened and closed like a fish. For the first time in 8 years, she had nothing to say. I didn't stay for the meltdown. I simply walked out into the cool evening air, the same air that smelled like fresh-cut grass and freedom for the first time in years. Behind me, voices rose, angry, confused, but mostly relieved. The Step 4 dollhouse was cracking wide open. The next morning, my phone lit up with text from half the neighborhood. Margaret, we need you. Can you come back? We're starting a new residence group. Will you lead it? I replied to one. Happy to consult, but the old board has to go first. By the end of the week, the external audit had already uncovered enough to make headlines in the local paper. Whispering Pines, HOA board faces lawsuits over selective enforcement. Karen's face, pearls and all, appeared beneath the headline, looking like she'd swallowed a lemon. Tyler resigned from the board in a single-paragraph email that basically said, I was just trying to help. Karen followed 3 days later, citing personal reasons. The new interim board begged me to return as enforcement coordinator with actual pay this time. I politely declined. I had a better offer from the Oak Ridge Residents Alliance, turning their neighborhood into the anti-HOA success story. Property values, they were climbing while Whispering Pines dipped for the first time in a decade. Some nights, I still walk the cul-de-sac. The lawns are still mostly 2 inches. But now, there's a bright red door here. An RV parked proudly there. And one guy's political flag flies year-round. The skeletons came down, but only because the owners chose to take them down, not because Karen Matthews said so. And every time I pass her house, now for sale. By the way, I allow myself one small, satisfied smile. The woman they tried to intimidate didn't disappear. She simply stopped protecting them from themselves. In Whispering Pines, it finally started to breathe. The chaos didn't stop at the town hall. It snowballed like a perfectly manicured lawn suddenly hit by a weed whacker. Within 48 hours of Section 22C activating, the HOA's bank account was locked tighter than Karen's smile at a neighborhood potluck. Dues for March sat frozen while the auditor, an actual bulldog of a lawyer named Mr. Reynolds, started digging through 12 years of records. Every email, every wave fine, every, just between us, text Karen thought had disappeared. I watched it unfold from my kitchen table, sipping tea and taking notes for the Oak Ridge group. They'd already offered me a paid consulting gig, help us write bylaws that actually protect people instead of punishing them. I accepted. My new title, Residents' Rights Advocate, sounded a lot better than Stubborn Old Bat. Back in Whispering Pines, the residents were having the time of their lives. Mrs. Delgado planted a vegetable garden that spilled into the sidewalk, technically a violation of the no edible landscaping in front yards rule. But with enforcement suspended, she just waved at passers-by and offered free tomatoes. Mr. Patel parked his fishing boat in the driveway for a full week. When Tyler tried to send a strongly worded email from his personal account, Mr. Patel replied with a photo of Karen's own boat trailer parked illegally last summer. Tyler went radio silent. Karen tried one last power play. She scheduled a special emergency meeting and sent invitations via certified mail. Ironic, since that was the same method I'd used to resign. The agenda: restoring order and accountability. Translation: please someone make Margaret come back so we don't all get sued. I showed up, not to save them, to watch. The community center was packed. Even people who never came to meetings showed up with popcorn vibes. Karen stood at the podium in a new power suit, pearls replaced by a desperate smile. Tyler sat beside her, looking like a kid who'd been caught stealing from the cookie jar. Friends, she began, voice trembling just enough to be noticeable. Recent events have been challenging. But we're a community. We rise together. If Margaret would consider returning in an advisory capacity. I raised my hand from the third row. The room hushed. Karen, I said, loud enough for the back to hear. Section 22C is very clear. You can't advisory your way out of personal liability. The auditor's preliminary report arrived this morning. Would you like me to read the highlights? Her face went sheet white. Tyler actually shrank in his chair. I didn't need to read it. Everyone already knew. The report listed 37 instances of selective enforcement. Fines dropped for Karen's sister. Her best friend's unapproved pool. Tyler's illegal basketball hoop that had been up for 18 months. Each one now carried potential damages. The total exposure? Mid-six figures if even half the residents filed claims. Mrs. Delgado stood up next. I'd like to file one right now. For emotional distress caused by 12 years of tomato harassment. The room exploded in laughter. Real laughter. The kind that comes when the bully finally gets the wedges she deserves. Karen tried to regain control. This is not productive. We need unity. Unity, Mr. Henderson barked. You mean unity under your rules while you break them? My Mustang stayed parked for a week, and suddenly it's fine. Funny how that works when Margaret's not around to enforce your little dictatorship. Tyler's phone started buzzing nonstop. He glanced at the screen, and his face went green. The local news had picked up the story. Whispering Pines, HOA meltdown. President faces lawsuits over hypocrisy. Someone had leaked the auditor's summary. Probably the same someone who'd been quietly recording every board meeting for the last 2 years, me. Karen's voice cracked completely. I was only trying to protect property values. Property values are down 8% this month, I said calmly. Funny what happens when people stop fearing the fines and start fearing the lawsuits instead. She sat down. Actually sat down in the middle of her own meeting. Tyler tried to say something about modern solutions, but his voice died when 3 residents simultaneously held up printed copies of Section 22C. I stood up, gathered my binder, the same one I'd carried to her house that first morning, and walked out. No dramatic speech. No gloating. Just the quiet click of the door behind me. Outside, the cul-de-sac looked different already. A few houses had new flags. One driveway had a basketball hoop. Mrs. Delgado's tomatoes were thriving under the streetlight. And for the first time in years, nobody was measuring grass with a ruler. My phone buzzed. Oak Ridge Alliance president. We just got 3 families from Whispering Pines asking to join us. They said they're done with the dollhouse life. When can you start? I smiled at the screen. Tomorrow. The auditor's final report dropped like a bomb on a perfectly trimmed lawn. 147 pages of documented hypocrisy, neatly organized in the same format I used to use for violation notices. Karen's name appeared 63 times. Tyler's, 29. The board as a whole was looking at potential class action territory if the residents decided to get nasty. I didn't have to decide anything. The residents did it for me. A new group chat formed overnight. Whispering Pines Residents Alliance. No Karen allowed. The first post was a screenshot of the report's cover page with the caption, "Who wants to file together? I'll buy the first round of margaritas." 53 people replied yes within an hour. Karen tried to delete her Facebook posts, but the internet never forgets. Screenshots of her old community standards matter red heart. Rants were everywhere, right next to photos of her own Christmas lights still up in March. Tyler deleted his entire Instagram. Too late. Someone had already archived his Lean Ops 2025 story where he'd posed next to his illegal hoop like a proud dad. I stayed out of the group chat. I didn't need to lead the rebellion. I'd already lit the match. Instead, I focused on Oak Ridge, rewriting their bylaws from scratch. No more beige mandates. No more gnome limits. Just reasonable rules that protected people instead of egos. The first family from Whispering Pines moved in last week. They told me their old house sold a loss because the HOA drama tanked the market. I didn't say I told you so. I just handed them the new welcome packet and said, "Here, you're safe now. Back in the Pines." The board tried one last desperate move. They hired a fancy consultant, some guy from California who charged $300 an hour to tell them what I'd been saying for free for 12 years. He lasted exactly 4 days before he quit in an email that read, "The foundational governance document you all signed contains a self-destruct clause. I cannot ethically continue while personal liability looms. Good luck." Karen's for sale sign went up the next morning. Tyler moved back to the city for career opportunities. The remaining board members voted to dissolve the old HOA structure and start over under new leadership. 3 retired teachers, a nurse, and Mr. Patel, who promised to keep the rules reasonable and tomato-friendly. They asked me to consult on the transition. I said yes, this time for a proper fee. My first recommendation, burn the old beige paint chart and let people choose their own door colors. The day the new bylaws passed, the neighborhood threw a block party. Not the stiff HOA potluck with assigned dishes and color-coordinated napkins. A real one. Grills fired up. Music played. Kids ran wild. Mrs. Delgado brought her famous tomato salsa. Mr. Henderson parked his Mustang right in the middle of the cul-de-sac like a trophy. I sat on a lawn chair with a glass of lemonade, watching the sunset turn the houses, now a cheerful mix of red doors, blue shutters, and one very proud purple garage, into something that finally looked lived in. Karen drove past once in her moving truck. She didn't stop. She didn't wave. She just stared straight ahead, pearls probably still clutched in her lap. I raised my glass in a silent toast. Not to her. To every resident who'd finally learned that the loudest voice isn't always the right one, and that the quiet woman with the binder had been protecting them all along. Whispering Pines wasn't perfect. It probably never would be. But it was real. And for the first time in years, it felt like home. The new board met for the first time without beige folders or scripted agendas. They met at my kitchen table because nobody trusted the old community center anymore. Too many memories of Karen's passive-aggressive PowerPoints. Mr. Patel brought donuts. The retired teachers brought sharp questions. The nurse brought common sense. I walked them through the new bylaws line by line. No more Section 22C landmines. Just clear language, appeal processes, and, most importantly, a clause that said any board member caught in selective enforcement would owe the entire neighborhood a public apology and community service hours mowing lawns. They loved it. One of the teachers actually teared up. "Margaret, you turned a dictatorship into a democracy." I shrugged. I just remembered that rules are supposed to serve people, not the other way around. News of the overhaul spread. 3 more families from the old regime sold and moved to Oak Ridge. Property values in Whispering Pines stabilized, then started climbing again once the Karen-free label stuck. Local news did a follow-up story. From HOA horror to happy homes. How one woman's quiet clause changed everything. They wanted to interview me. I declined. The real story wasn't about me yelling louder than Karen. It was about what happens when people stop being afraid of the woman with the clipboard and start reading the fine print themselves. Tyler tried one last pathetic move. He sent me a LinkedIn message from his new startup in the city. Open to a call about lessons learned? I replied with the same line I'd given him on my porch. Direct all inquiries to legal counsel. Then I blocked him. Karen's house sat empty for 3 months. When it finally sold, the new owners immediately painted the front door bright yellow and planted sunflowers in the front yard. The realtor told me they'd specifically asked if the neighborhood still had that crazy HOA lady. The answer was no. The answer would never be yes again. I kept my consulting work with Oak Ridge and took on 2 more neighborhoods that had heard the legend. Each time I started the same way. Tell me about your Karen. Every single one had one. Every single one needed the same quiet clause written into their bylaws, just in case. Some nights, I still get calls from former Whispering Pines residents. "Margaret, the new board is trying to limit holiday lights again. What do? I tell them the same thing. Read the new bylaws. Page 7. Appeal process. And remember, you're not the stubborn one anymore. They are. The cul-de-sac looks nothing like the catalog anymore. Flags fly. Gardens grow wild. Kids draw chalk hopscotch on driveways. And every time I walk past the spot where Karen used to stand with her clipboard, I feel the same small flicker of satisfaction I felt the morning I sent that resignation letter. Justice doesn't always come with a dramatic courtroom scene or viral video. Sometimes it comes in the quiet click of a certified mail receipt. Sometimes it comes when the neighborhood finally breathes. And sometimes, just sometimes, it comes when the woman they called stubborn old bat turns out to be the one holding all the cards the whole time. I never needed to raise my voice. I never needed to fight dirty. I just needed them to underestimate me one last time. They did. And Whispering Pines is better for it. The end.